In South Africa, one question dominates. How much longer should President Jacob Zuma stay? The fallout deepens from the release of a Republican memo on FBI surveillance. And what's the one event that could knock the Super Bowl out of Twitter's #1 top trending topics? Yes, it's Kylie Jenner related. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and a warm welcome to you. You're watching Africa 54. I'm Heidi Adams-Fitzpatrick. Vincent McCory is off today. We begin in Kenya. We'll have those stories for you in a moment, but first we go to Kenya, where 2 of 3 Kenyan television stations shuttered by the government over their coverage of the political opposition resumed partial broadcasting on Monday. NTV resumed broadcasting on its pay-to-view channels, according to its Twitter feed, but its free-to-air channel was still off. KTN News has also resumed on its free-to-air channel, but Citizen TV, which was also shut down last week, remains off air. And now for more on the story, VOA's Daniel Scherf joins us on the phone from Nairobi. Daniel, a very good evening to you.
Good evening.
Can you explain for us why are only 2 of the 3 television stations now back on air? How did that happen?
Well, it happened rather suddenly. There was no real announcement made in terms of the actual broadcasts on the channels. They just suddenly came back on. 2 out of the 3. Again, though, Citizen TV, of course, is still off the air, and we don't know why that is. We're waiting for Kenya's Communications Authority to explain. Hopefully, they'll have some kind of explanation as to why this channel is still considered some sort of a problem for authorities. Of course, last week there was a court order saying that they needed to restore the broadcasts, and that was ignored. So there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered. There was a protest today here in Nairobi by civil society and rights groups expressing their concerns about a crackdown on independent media as a result of this week-long shutdown.
Daniel, are we headed here for some sort of showdown between the government and the judiciary, given that there's a Kenyan activist who's filing a lawsuit now calling for the arrest of some senior government officials?
Well, certainly it seems like there is a standoff between the authorities. It's not just between the media companies and the authorities, but we're seeing the government agencies ignoring court orders. This is a very serious thing, and it certainly raises a lot of eyebrows and a lot of concerns here in Kenya when you look back at the history of the country and how there have been authoritarian moves in the past by governments. That certainly raises a lot of concerns among people here in Kenya that the country may be backsliding towards some of those past tendencies that did occur, unfortunately. So a lot of concerns. Hopefully we're going to see some answers to a lot of these questions in the coming days. And of course it is a good sign. We have to at least underscore that at least 2 of the 3 channels have been restored their broadcast, at least for now. But we do have pending court cases, and so this is going to be a continued fight, a continued standoff, at least for the time being.
Well, some good news there, but also very, very worrying developments. Daniel, thank you very much. We're going to keep a close eye on this story. That's VOA's Daniel Scherf reporting for us from Nairobi. Meanwhile, as we mentioned, a Kenyan activist has filed a lawsuit seeking the arrest of 2 government ministers and a senior official for contempt of court after the government ignored a court order to reopen 3 television channels it shut down over their political coverage. The stations were shuttered as they tried to broadcast opposition leader Raila Odinga's self-declared inauguration as the people's president. Police used tear gas Monday to disperse more than 100 demonstrators demanding the channels be reopened. The demonstrators were trying to march on government offices in central Nairobi when the police fired the gas.
We are against muzzling of journalists. The TV shut down and the High Court gave an order to allow TVs to be back on air. And up to now, the government has not obeyed the court order. We are against the arrest of opposition leaders. Up to now, Miguna Miguna has been arrested and the court gave out an order for him to be charged.
I have joined my fellow Kenyans who feel aggrieved by how things are unfolding in Kenya. People are tired of government oppression, and I'm here because I want my kids to have a better education, a better life. I want my country to be free and safe, and for now, we lack that. We have police officers, but people are mugged every day in the city. We have police, but we have no freedom. Our country, Kenya, is ruined.
Now, the shutdown of the television stations prompted criticism from the United States, the United Nations and Britain. Odinga's opposition alliance has not yet announced his next plans. He failed to show up at a rally on Sunday, leaving his allies to explain that he would outline his steps this week. Well, we're staying in Kenya. There are many questions tonight about the death of a prominent investigator of the illegal ivory and rhino horn trade. Esmond Bradley Martin was found stabbed to death in his Nairobi home at the weekend. He had spent decades tracking the movement of animal products, mostly from Africa, to markets in Asia. Bradley Martin's research was instrumental in China's decision to ban its legal rhino horn trade in 1993. It also pressured China to end legal ivory sales, a ban that came into force on January 1st. Bradley Martin was set to publish a report exposing how the ivory trade shifted from China to neighboring countries. He is the second prominent conservationist to die in East Africa in the past year. South African Wayne Lotter, whose work also targeted ivory smuggling from Africa to Asia, was shot and killed in Tanzania last August. Well, turning to South Africa now, and there have been violent clashes outside the ruling African National Congress headquarters in Johannesburg. This is as the party's leadership discusses President Jacob Zuma's political future. Now, pressure is mounting on him to resign. Zuma's position has weakened since he was replaced as ANC leader by his deputy president, Cyril Ramaphosa. Zuma is rejecting calls that he quit before his term ends next year, saying it will cost the ANC at the polls. The party's so-called top six leadership team met over the weekend to discuss Zuma's fate. No word yet on what was decided. Ramaphosa has been lobbying for Zuma's removal. Zuma is expected to face a fresh vote of no confidence in Parliament on February 22nd. Remember, he has survived several such votes in the past thanks to loyal support inside the ANC. But Zuma's popularity in the party is waning, and several of his allies have deserted him. Now, for more on the debate over Zuma's future, I'm joined live via Skype by political analyst Zwelethwa Jolobe. He is in Cape Town, South Africa, and joins us now. Zwelethwa, a very, very good evening to you. Why does Jacob Zuma need to go, and why does he need to go now?
Good evening. Well, that answer is quite simple, and that is that a lot of the issues that the ANC faces are largely in part to do with all the scandal around him, and that the ANC's own internal research in fact revealed that the reason why they lost Pretoria, Johannesburg and Port Elizabeth in our elections 2 years ago was in part to do with general voter dissatisfaction, in particular with the issues around Mr. Zuma. And so I think that why the insistence that he goes now, that has to do with the fact that the ANC now has a new team, and their main priority is to try to regain the lost ground that they lost in the locally elections. And I think that in terms of how they're seeing it, is that Mr. Zuma leaving now, even though that won't solve the problem, is one step towards trying to regain some kind of legitimacy in the face of a declining ANC. And so this has to do, to a large extent, with how the ANC prepares for our next general election, and less about whether or not Mr. Zuma is innocent or is guilty or is complicit. It has to do with the kind of general negative narrative that has hurt the ANC at the polls.
Now, I'm sure you have been reading the tea leaves. We don't have a lot of time, so if you can very briefly tell us, what is your prediction? Is Jacob Zuma going to survive through the end of this week, or does he still have a chance to stay in it?
The only way that Mr. Zuma will leave is if there will be something of benefit to him, firstly, or two, if he is forced out legally, that is using the kind of formal parliamentary procedure. As of now, we know that a debate on a motion of no confidence is set for the 22nd of February. And at the moment, all our evidence points to the fact that most members of his own party in Parliament would support such a motion.
And that's going to be an interesting week there in South Africa indeed. Zwelethwa Jalobe, a political analyst from the University of Cape Town, speaking to us there via Skype from Cape Town. Thank you so much for your time. Well, it was another deadly weekend off the coast of North Africa. Moroccan and Spanish authorities pulled the bodies of 20 African migrants from the Sea of Melilla, a Spanish enclave in North Africa. Moroccan rescue services recovered the corpses after the crew of a Spanish ship spotted them in the water. It's believed the migrants had hoped to get to Europe by sailing from Melilla, and that they had ignored storm warnings. Melilla is a small Spanish territory bordering Morocco and is only one of two EU land borders with Africa. The Gulf of Guinea is the scene of an extensive search tonight for a fuel tanker carrying 22 Indian crew. The Marine Express was transporting 13,500 tons of gasoline. The Indian government says the ship was last seen off the coast of Benin on Friday when it lost contact. There's now an all-out effort to find the sailors with the help of Nigerian and Beninese naval authorities. Piracy off the coast of East Africa, particularly Somalia's unpoliced waters, was a serious concern about a decade ago. And while piracy incidents are falling worldwide, it's become a growing threat in the Gulf of Guinea. Modern life is filled with televisions, mobile phones and other electronics. Technology advances so quickly that many of these items are obsolete in just a few years after production. So they get replaced and the old ones are discarded. And as VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young reports, parts of sub-Saharan Africa are now being used as the dumping ground.
Their conveniences, their necessities, their status symbols, electronic goods such as TVs and phones. In with the new, out with the old. From the trash bins of Europe, North America, and other places, this ever-growing mountain of old electronics often winds up packed in containers shipped and dumped somewhere else, despite international bans on such disposal. The massive scope of the so-called e-waste problem is stated via Skype from Norway by Rihipto Norwegian Center analyst Christian Nellemann.
The global illegal trafficking in waste, electronic waste, is at least in the scale of 50 million tons annually. And considerable portions of this is dumped in West Africa.
While electronic waste dumping takes place across Africa, two nations, Nigeria and Ghana, are standouts. The United Nations Environment Program says Nigeria generates some 1.1 million tons of e-waste and Ghana about 180,000 tons per year. To get past bans, including the Basel and Bamako conventions, the presence of e-waste in shipments is often concealed, as discussed via Skype from Abidjan by the UNEP's Abdurrahman Bari.
People deliberately send e-waste using this mislabeling. Labeling it has some equipment, electric equipment, but still can be used but it's not true.
At the Agbogbloshie dump in Accra and at similar sub-Saharan African e-waste graveyards, workers dismantle everything from computers and televisions to refrigerators, largely by smashing and burning things to extract metal from wires and circuit boards. Much of this work is done by young people, even children, and it's quite dangerous, according to the UNEP's Barry.
And doing so, they generate toxic chemicals like furans, dioxins, and they are directly exposed because they don't use any protective equipment.
These e-waste poisons not only saturate dump sites and the air above them, but when it rains, hazardous chemicals are washed both into the soil and eventually into nearby waters where they can enter the food chain and remain for years. Ghana has announced that it wants to establish recycling centers where things such as old electronics can be more cleanly and safely handled. Along with health incentives, these facilities have the technology to recover more of what is valuable, such as the gold plating on connectors and silver solder. Electronics manufacturing needs to be a closed cycle, according to an official at NGO Greenpeace, Elizabeth Jardine.
And it's also important for the companies that make these products to take responsibility for them at end of life and educate consumers about returning these products, incentivizing them to return the products so that they can handle them.
Ms. Jardine says Apple is one corporation that is moving in that direction. But until this closed cycle becomes the norm, sub-Saharan Africa will continue to drown in e-waste. Jeffrey Young, VOA News.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover here. You can join the conversation on Facebook. The address there is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, the latest fallout from a Republican memo on FBI surveillance. Do stay with us. Here with Africa 54, welcome back. Washington is witnessing a moment of extreme friction between the White House and U.S. law enforcement, and it's rivaling that of the Watergate scandal of the 1970s. The fallout continues from Friday's release of a Republican House committee memo alleging bias and improper procedures at the FBI. President Donald Trump says that document vindicates him, but Justice Department officials say it's misleading and damaging to national security. VOA's Michael Bowman has more.
As a candidate, Donald Trump stood firmly on the side of law enforcement.
I am the law and order candidate. An attack on law enforcement is an attack on all Americans.
As president, Trump is not refraining from verbal jabs at the FBI, tweeting, quote, "The top leadership and investigators of the FBI and the Justice Department have politicized the sacred investigative process in favor of Democrats and against Republicans." Such a public accusation coming directly from a U.S. president is unprecedented in a country where successive administrations assumed law enforcement's impartiality. Trump made the charge after Republican lawmakers released a memo alleging the FBI relied on research funded by Democrats to get court permission for surveillance during the early months of the Russia probe.
The FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign in the summer of 2016. That's what happened. And then they got a warrant on someone in the Trump campaign using opposition research paid for by the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign.
The FBI said it had grave concerns about the memo's material omissions of fact. Democrats called the document embarrassingly flawed and deeply wrong on the law.
The interest wasn't oversight. The interest was a political hit job on the FBI in the service of the president.
Even some Republicans have expressed misgivings about the memo, with Senator Susan Collins saying, quote, bipartisanship and careful vetting would have been a far better way to proceed. Trump tweeted the memo vindicates him in the Russia probe amid persistent media reports that the president has considered firing the deputy attorney general as well as the man leading the Russia investigation, special counsel Robert Mueller.
This memo is not an indictment of the FBI, of the Department of Justice. It does not impugn the Mueller investigation or the deputy attorney general.
Amid the fury, FBI Director Christopher Wray, a Trump appointee, urged Bureau employees to keep doing their work independently and by the book. Democrats, meanwhile, are warning of lasting damage to intelligence collection.
Sources are going to dry up because of what the Republicans on this committee are doing now, and that's a deep disservice which ultimately makes the country less safe.
Republicans who backed the memo contend they are standing up for civil liberties by focusing on how the U.S. government obtains permission to spy on its citizens. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
Britain says it wants to be part of China's so-called One Belt, One Road initiative. It's a cornerstone of President Xi Jinping's vision to boost Chinese investment and influence across Asia, Europe and Africa. There are, however, concerns about the financial and humanitarian costs of these vast infrastructure projects. The United States has issued a blunt warning over what it sees as the dangers of being tied to China's huge investment projects. Henry Ridgwell is in London for us with this report.
British Prime Minister Theresa May led a delegation of ministers and business leaders to China this past week, signing trade deals worth $12.7 billion, hailing a golden era of Sino-British relations. Her ambassador earlier outlined Britain's hopes of cooperating in China's One Belt, One Road initiative.
The first is we'd like to collaborate on practical projects. The second area where we'd like to collaborate with China is bringing some of our City of London financing experience, because these projects are big projects, particularly in infrastructure. They require complex funding mechanisms.
Too complex, according to some. Soaring above the swamp between Uganda's capital and its airport, this new 51-kilometre expressway is due to open in May. It was built by the China Communications Construction Company, and its $580 million cost was met with a loan from Beijing. Kampala's mayor says the price is too high.
Even these Chinese who are coming here from even the commercial banks we are borrowing from, Exim banks and whatnot, the burden will finally come on our shoulders as Ugandans. So our children and grandchildren will have to shoulder this burden, which is very, very unfortunate.
China has invested across Africa, Asia and the Middle East under the One Belt initiative, and even into Eastern Europe. Britain should tread carefully in its dealings, says Barnaby Willits-King of the Overseas Development Institute.
Particularly in fragile parts of the world where China's Belt and Road Initiative is going to be running through, there are a lot of potential risks around humanitarian concerns, environmental concerns that I think focusing just on a trade deal might overlook. But it's also got an advantage. The UK has worked and invested in a lot of these countries over the years, and it could actually provide some very practical advice to China.
The US has gone further in its criticism of China's trade and foreign policy. US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson offered a warning ahead of a trip to Latin America Thursday.
China, as it does in emerging markets throughout the world, offers the appearance of an attractive path to development. But in reality, this often involves trading short-term gains for long-term dependency.
Many emerging economies welcome China's investments and the involvement of countries like Britain. But there are concerns that mounting debts will cause big problems further down the road. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come here on Africa 54. A big announcement from Kylie Jenner breaks the internet. Surprise, surprise. We'll be back in a moment.
Members of the South African ruling ANC party clash with members of the Black First Land First over support of President Jacob Zuma, whose presidency has been engulfed with corruption scandals. In Kenya, protesters hold a demonstration in Nairobi Monday, rallying against the government's closure of 3 independent media organizations. In Senegal, President Macky Sall co-hosted a global partnership for education event with French President Emmanuel Macron, who promised 200 million euros in foreign aid. In Morocco, the wetlands have been added to an international list of protected sites across the world as the kingdom eyes to implement a preservation strategy striving for sustainability.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Let's look at what's trending this Monday. Reality TV star Kylie Jenner announced on Sunday the birth of her child with rapper Travis Scott after months of rumors surrounding her pregnancy. The 20-year-old Jenner said in a post on social media platform Instagram that her beautiful, healthy baby girl arrived on February 1st. She apologized to fans for keeping her pregnancy a secret. The arrival of Jenner's child quickly became the top trending topic on Twitter in the United States, surpassing hashtag Super Bowl Sunday just hours before the start of the game. Now, could a new robot shake up the world of deliveries? The latest robot to hit the streets of Cremona, northern Italy, is Yape, a self-driving vehicle that can transport small packages and items from one location to another within the same city. Yape stands for Your Autonomous Pony Express, and it works through an app by the same name. The sender types in the pickup and drop-off addresses and waits for Yape to show up. The robot runs on electricity and offers a cleaner alternative to delivery cars and motorbikes. I am all up for that. And finally, Cuba's small but exuberant skateboard movement has carved out a new space for itself, helped by a Cuban-American skate shop owner. Using small donations from individuals and a handful of charities, they've turned a former military base and academic center in Liberty City into a ramp-filled skate park. Participants range in age from 8 to 50 years old. Cuba has no formal federation for the sport, and the island has no place to buy skateboards, which would be too expensive for most Cubans. And that is what is trending today. And that is also where we will leave our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. And for more news, tune into VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thank you for watching. From all of us here in Washington, good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Today's episode won't cost you anything.
Freebie.
Let's see what this one is about.
Anna, I love my job.
Oh yeah? Why is that?
I get so many freebies from the bands I write about. CDs, t-shirts, water bottles, even tickets to see them perform.
Wow. The only freebie I ever got from my job